as a former social caseworker, supervising probation officer, psychological counselor, training administrator in New York City, Department of Juvenile Justice, and assistant professor of psychology at the City University of New York. He is currently adjunct professor at the School of New Resources College of New Rochelle and the Co-op City campus, Bronx, New York. And it's my pleasure to present to you Dr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Sister Muhammad. And I certainly am honored to be invited again to share this time with you. I certainly admire the work that you're doing, and I would encourage you to continue. I am going to basically sort of outline some issues of an African-centered education. Look forward to my publication on this subject around about the first of the year. We're going to deliver you about 500 to 600 pages on educating the Black African-American child for the 21st century. Because you have to recognize, the African-American child is a subject matter as complex and as important as any other child. And it's a child that when we talk about it, we may issue pamphlets and so forth. Ultimately, we must give our children the full treatment. So we're going to cover in that book a host of issues from the point of view of the impact that racism and oppression and so forth have had on our people, up to how we can institute and implement very practical programs for solving our problems as a people. So today I'm just going to outline some issues around that matter. I'm speaking then to educating the African American child for the 21st century. Rationales for an African-centered education, not a multicultural education, but an African-centered education. There's an important difference between those two things. Of course, sometimes we use multicultural as diplomatic speech, but in our hearts, we must recognize that African-centered education has a focus that cannot be covered by multicultural education, at least the way it is being projected in today's terms. Different things. We have to be careful. Multiculturalism, as I will point out a little bit later on, can be used to stifle African-centered education and to co-opt African-centered education. Whenever you see the system buying an approach to education, you can believe that approach is ultimately designed to work against African interests. You must keep that in mind. In other words, when white folks start pushing multicultural education, it's because they think that it's going to maintain them in a position of dominance over African people. Because whites and Europeans are not going to push any approach to education that ultimately is going to relieve them of their control of the lives of black people. We have to keep that in mind. And some of us forget about that. We cannot afford another 20 years of blunders and 30 years of misthinking, such as with this so-called integration of schools, which is destroying our families and our children and our social structures and so forth. This is a space age, which means, ladies and gentlemen, 20 years is equivalent to 120 years in earlier times. Let's think of the electronic revolutions that have taken place within 10 years and 5 years. So we can no longer afford to wait to find out that we made educational mistakes after 20 years or so. It'll be too late. As a matter of fact, we as a people must transform our situation drastically within the next 10 to 15 years, or else there's a question as to whether we will even be alive on this planet. That means that when you discuss the education of black people and of black children, the first thing we must look at, of course, is what you mean by the term. I see too many people talking about the education of our children without discussing what it really means. You must understand that almost all words in the language have a political and social history and represent a cultural history of a people. Words are not mere means of communicating ideas. Words are means often of manipulating consciousness. Words can be used to prevent thought, can be used to prevent creativity. I often hear, sometimes when we talk about a discussion of educational issues, people will say things like, well, that's not the school's role. What do you mean that's not the school's role? The school's role is whatever we decide the school's role is. The schools belong to the people, and the schools are there to operate in the interests of the people. There is no definition of what a school is written in concrete, such that we cannot redefine a school in terms of our own interests. But when you don't stop first and ask, what is a school? What is its function? How can it work for us? Then you lose the capacity to transform the schools and have them work for you. It means then that we don't define these terms. We will use terms that we borrowed from other people. And since those terms have been founded on their political and cultural experience, on their goals and values, we will be locked in and our thoughts will be inhibited as far as the movement of our people is concerned. We will not be able to come up with creative ways of educating our children, because we will be talking about how it goes outside the definition of education. Whose definition? Whose definition of a school? If one of the major things that African-centered education teaches you is that Africans have the right and must take the right to rename the world and to define the world. One of the major reasons black children are being educated in an African-centered system is so they will take the power of definition away from Europeans. You understand what I'm saying? If you don't, then you'll never be under their control and domination. Those of you who are in the Bible, into the Bible, recall that Adam was given the symbol of domination over the earth by God giving him permission to do what? To name things. When another people names things and define things, you've conceded to them power and control. And the day that you and the African people assume the power of definition and others take that definition, then we know we have assumed real power in the world. And as long as you then use the definition of other people without thinking it through, you're still under their power, even though you may be talking about revolution. There's nothing basic has changed. What is the function of education? To show to a degree, you see, how education, the concept of education, has a political history. Many of us are trying to explain why our children should go to school. and try to explain to them why they should go to school, rather than come up with the statement, go to school so you can get a good job. You know, go to school so you can be somebody. You'll say, go to school so you can have skills. Now, what does that really imply? It implies a definition of education as a marketable factor. In other words, go to school so you can sell yourself more easily to others. That's almost the rewriting of the old slavery concept, isn't it? Yeah. Go to school so that you can be a more valuable commodity and be more profitable to the other folks. Not so that what? You can own the world. Not so that you can what? Create jobs and employ other people. Not so that you can control your own earth and control your own economic system. So that you can not go for a ride on spaceships, but actually create them yourself and make them and move into space on your own. No, so that you can be bought and sold like a commodity on the marketplace. So that the highest reason for you to go to school is to make yourself of value to someone else, other than to yourself and other than to your people. And think about it, that's the way we approach the concept of education. It's a jobs approach. As it's the ultimate reasons why we as African Americans should go to school is so that we can get jobs. Not make jobs, not create jobs, get jobs. It's a definition of education that assumes then that whites will always be in the place of giving jobs to black folk. It doesn't say go to school so you can take from whites their power over jobs. It's a very good thing. But if you don't stop and recognize the term and say, what does it mean to me? What do I want it to do for me? Then you'll use it in a way as it is given by our masters and our oppressors. And no matter how much we talk about the appropriate education of our children, they will always be educated to work for those oppressors, no matter how hard they try. It will not allow you to reconstruct the whole approach to the education of our children, because the definition places certain limitations on what you will call education. So you have to recognize, first of all, then, that education is what you make it. And you must make it for yourself. The ultimate function of education is to secure the survival of a people. Every culture engages in education, no matter how so-called primitive or how advanced. When it trains its young how to maintain its values, how to maintain the structure of its social relations and its organization, how to maintain its economic system, and so forth. That culture is involved in education. And the major point of any culture's involvement with education is to maintain itself and to secure its survival and to advance its interests. Not other people's interests, not other people's survival, its own survival. For what good will it do you and us to train our children in mathematics and computer technology and all the rest of this stuff if we are not alive in the 21st century? You must ask yourself, in what way will the kind of education we are giving to our children secure our very biological existence? If education cannot secure our very biological existence, all the rest of it is nonsense. It has no value whatsoever. You have to look at your assumption when you're talking about educating our children so that they can get a job and they can be accepted in the marketplace. That assumes that the other people are going to accept you in the marketplace. What assurance do you have of that? Why are you operating on the assumption that the mere education of black children and the qualifying of black children is going to automatically lead to their employment by other people? You have to be out of your mind. Whites are not under any obligation, moral or any otherwise, to hire black children because they are qualified. So you must see about first things first. And the first thing is hire yourself and make your own life. And number one, you must stay alive. How do you, in this year of Columbus, talk about the death and murder of Indians and the millions of African people who sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean and the millions that died in the cane plantations in the Caribbean and other places? Place your life in the hands of European people and assume that somehow they're going to be benevolent toward you. You must face reality. And that's the major central issue in an African-centered education. It's not built on dreams. It's not built on false hopes. It's built on reality. And the possibilities that people who may accept you today will reject you tomorrow. So that it is during the good times when they do accept you, when little black boys and little white girls, old man, that you prepare for the day they might not accept you. You understand? That means we recognize, ladies and gentlemen, as we've said before, that there are two words, integration and what? Disintegration. And they both happen in historical time. Which means that there are periods of progress, and there are periods of harmony, there are periods of good race relations, but that doesn't mean that they shall go on forever. You see, and too many of our leaders have misled us to think one day on that great getting up morning when we wake up and white folks will, accept us as their own, and we will, live together, go to work together, we get into a fairy tale mode, and they live happily ever after. That happens only in fairy tales. In realities, races come together and races come apart. In realities, people are friends one day and deadly enemies the next. And therefore, people who are really concerned about their survival and their existence must secure that survival and existence for themselves and not place that survival and existence on the goodwill of another people. Therefore, they cannot permit another people to have the power of life and death over themselves. How can you look at and talk about in this age of Columbus, the 500th anniversary of Columbus, and not recognize the modus operandi of European people? I had one audience here last week or so about our dealing with this Columbus situation. As you know, it's a lot of fun to get up and talk about what a demon Columbus was and what disaster followed his discovery of the Americas. We may even get a little moralistic rush from talking about it. You see, we can kind of stroke our egos talking about the evil white man and evil Columbus represented. But you have to be careful, or else you will over-personalize the issues and act as if Columbus was the problem.
All right.
He Essentially, the same thing would have followed had it been any other European who made it to these shores. What we were dealing with Columbus was a clash of cultures. Columbus had behind him an organization of men. And that's again why we talk about educating young black men. Understand? Because it is the duty of men to defend and to make war. And therefore, when we look at Columbus, we see behind Columbus an organization of men. Columbus didn't come over here by himself. He didn't even finance his own trip. We see behind Columbus a technological system. We see behind Columbus a political system, a social system, and so forth. So what you have here is not Columbus discovering America, but a clash of two social, political, and economic systems, and one giving away to the power of the other. And therefore, it doesn't gain us much to talk about Columbus as a personality, but to talk about the difference in the organization of European and African systems, and how the African system can be transformed such that this will not happen again, and Europeans will not take Africans into slavery of any form and in any sort of way. So the discussion should be more around what is the nature of African organization, military, political, social, economic, and otherwise relative to Europeans, and what kind of organizations do we need to develop to secure ourselves as a people. Then you start getting into the function of education. We'll come back to it. What is the function of black education in white America and in a European-dominated world? And this is where you must start from. You must start from the world as it is. Often when we discuss issues having to do with our people, we do not start far enough back in a sequence. We talk about black male and female relations. And we'll talk about it just in terms of black male and female relations, as if those relations do not occur within a social political system. And that social and political system has a history, and it has goals and aims. We don't see then how the behavior of the relationship how the behavior of black men and women in many ways is being influenced and impacted on and being manipulated by that social and political system. Therefore, often we end up pointing accusing fingers at each other. If you don't do this, if you don't do that, you don't do this. We look into the literature, and I had a tough time with my class here 2 weeks ago, with the common statement, the real basis of educational advancement of black children is the family. We love that one. You know, it's family background that determines the children's success. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. The family itself is a product of what? Of a social political system. The family is a social agent. Its major function is to create the kind of children a society needs to maintain its integrity. And therefore, if this society needs inept black children, then the black family will be unwittingly manipulated into creating that ineptness. But we cannot look at the family as the source of that problem. We must look at that system and how it distorts the black family and dupes it into an ally of its goals. You got to start early enough. So we talk about how we're going to teach our children to read and write better. Read for what? To what end? Do math to what end? It's not enough to just teach them to read well. What have I said before? Clarence Thomas reads well. Black conservatives read very well, highly educated people. Cola know Powell reads very well. He can even read maps and the whole bit. And yet with his reading well, he's attacked black nations. He's in charge of the destruction of African nations should his white masters ask him to do so. So his learning to read well, his learning to do math well, his learning of computer science and technology and all of that has basically qualified him to efficiently destroy black people. So therefore, you see, an Afrocentric education is not just about getting children to read well and to do math well. It asks the question, for what? To what end? In what way are you going to read well to do what thing in terms of black people? You see? In what way are you going to use your reading skills to defend the interests of African people? In what way are you going to use your math skills to advance our people? That's part of the issue. You must recognize then that we are dominated by Europeans. And that means that that domination represents itself in the educational system, both in what we call explicit ways and implicit ways. When you talk about a curriculum, and we don't have time to talk about this today, you must look at what we call the explicit intentionality of the curriculum, and then what we call the implicit or hidden intentionality of the curriculum. That is, you cannot just look at it in terms of the skills that it teaches, or in terms of the coursework, because you can be deceived by those things. You know, well, they're teaching them math and science, I don't see a problem with that. You know, English, that's okay, this and that. That's the explicit one. But what is the real intention of that curriculum, you see? What is hidden behind it? What are they being taught math for, you see? To work for themselves, to work for others, to become mercenaries for other people against the interests of their own people? That often is hidden under the explicit curriculum. And it is that hidden one that you have to study very closely. When then we look at the Eurocentric curriculum and the curricula developed under Europeans, we have to recognize then that in the European-dominated world, the education of black people is an education for servitude. Oh yes, the European has no intention ever of letting you get out of a position of servility. I don't care how you play it. There's no intention there. And this is something we have to face. The only time that African people, as far as the European is concerned, is released from their roles as servants will be when the European decides to destroy us completely. And that is fast approaching. Yeah. You know, we give ourselves a lot of credit for surviving slavery. Right? Oh, we had faith in the Lord. And that's fine, we did. We did. But remember now, the white men didn't bring you over here to kill you. You see? Because we were what? A valuable commodity. They had to insure those slave cargoes and so forth. It was in their interest that we do stay alive. You see? Contrast that though with the Indian, who was a little what? Economic value to whites. As a matter of fact, they stood in the way of white economic development. And they were what? The same principle operates, ladies and gentlemen. As soon as we become a little of no economic use of value to Europeans, our number also will be up. In fact, it is already coming up in black-on-black violence at this very point. And we'll get back to that, because the very issue now that is confronting this nation is, do we need black people any longer? And one of the reasons why schools are being disinvested, black schools across this country, is that whites are reaching the conclusion that they no longer need to invest in black people's education because they can get the skills in other places. We have to keep that in mind. The basic role of black people and the basic relationship of black people to white folks in America has not changed since 1619. Don't be deceived because you got some skill or you learned some profession that the prior generation didn't have, or you're working for some company that we didn't work for before. Keep this in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Even during slavery, black people had skills. There were more than field hand and house servants. Black men had all types of skills, even under the slave regimes. So the idea that we have a diverse set of skills has nothing new at all in the history of black people. But you see, we are deceived by that, you see. What is the real constant there? The real constant is that black people are skilled both in slavery and both in neo-slavery so that they can work for the greater profit of white folks. That has not changed one bit. Not one bit. And we don't have time today to talk about what I call the European constants. Things that have remained exactly the same since we came into contact with Europeans. They haven't changed one bit. But if you're superficial, you will think that they've changed substantially. And that's one of the reasons why they give us these apparent changes. The basic relationship, the difference in military power that Europeans had when they came to Africa, has it more than anything else now? But why? Economic dominance, control of definition, as I talked to you earlier about. All of these very basic factors by which you dominate another people have not changed one bit. As a matter of fact, what you call progress in this system is a recruiting from the oppressed as a way of maintaining their oppression. What am I saying here? That's why you have to look at basic definitions. Imperialism, having to deal with empire. An empire and the population that constitutes that empire is much larger than the empirical group. And it's very important to keep that in mind. So you have Little England controlling what? Large populations. That's the nature of an empire. And what does that mean then at certain points in time? It means then that those who rule that empire often must recruit from the very people they rule over to maintain their rule. Am I getting through here? Yeah. Therefore, you cannot make the mistake of thinking because your people are being elected mayors and governors, being appointed to so-called high position, that represents the withering away of white domination and imperialism. As a matter of fact, they can serve as a sign that it is alive and well. The major function of the black conservative is to aid his European imperialists in maintaining the subordination of African people. What is he conserving? He can only be conserving the status quo and the ideologies that rationalize that status quo. And we say then that we have subordinated in that status quo and we are oppressed. Then the black conservative is conserving that oppression. Education under Eurocentric system is an education in alienation. African people are African people, not multicultural people. We're African people first. All right. We are not everyone. We are African people. And therefore, we must be educated in terms of our basic African identity. For if we are everyone, then we are what? No one. So now we have a system that alienates us from ourselves in the original Eurocentric system. And what we say is the role and function of alienation. The role and function ultimately is so that the products of your labor, so that your wealth and everything else can be given to whom? Aliens. Yeah. You're alienated to work for aliens. To be alienated means to be away from the what? Self. And when you are away from yourself, you cannot do for self. That is why the chief psychological keystone to holding up this system is to separate African people from their African identity. That way, their wealth, their labor, their products, everything else cannot be given to themselves and to African people, but given to others. Here you are with $200 and $300 billion, and you give only a nickel to yourself. You have to be alienated and out of your mind. But how else can other people become rich and wealthy, powerful on the labor of African people and on the production of African people, other than we're alienated from ourselves as people? And now we're going to become everybody, so everybody can make a living off of us but ourselves. Yeah. In a sense, we are multicultural already. That's why everybody is in the black community making money like black folks. Every Asian group knows that it can get over if it comes to the black community. Because we love everybody. We don't see color. All cultures are equal. That's illness. But in order for the European to rob us, we must be separated from self. That's necessary. You talk about how poor Tyson is going to make $30 million, and I hope he gets something out of it. It seems like a lot of people are going to have a payday with him. Or we look at our basketball players and they make, what, 4 or 5 million, somebody makes 10 million. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about the fact that if you pay somebody 30 million, they are generating what? 300 million. Who's getting the other part of the money? Black music sells 6% of the music in the world. It outsells people's native music. In other words, most people buy more black music even in their own country than they do of their own music. Billions of dollars. So you think a star that makes a few million represents something. Why is not that industry owned lock, stock, and barrel by black people? If you're saying that we earn $300 billion, then do you recognize that means we must be producing trillions? Understand? Where is that money going? That kind of production can only occur in an alienated people. They can only generate that wealth and give it away if they're separated from self. So the Afrocentric education is not about multiculturalism. It's about taking that money back and taking the product of your labor and using it in your own interest. This is is no Pollyanna game. Oh, your culture is equal to mine, and mine is equal to yours, and all that. Yeah, well, they're still doing what? Picking your pocket. No way. That's the reason why I'm telling you, you got to watch this multicultural game. Understand? As I tell people all the time, you know, if you're in a neighborhood where one racial group is taking all of the money and has control of the total economy, it is in their interest to come and say, we are all one. Yes, you're black Egyptians, I admit that. You invented math and you invented science. Isn't that nice? No, we're all Americans. But they still have what? The money. They still got control of the economic system. They still have your life in their hands. You see, this is why I don't like violence. I talk about what I call dumb goodness. You know, black people are dumb goodness. You know, they're good just because of the rule. They don't understand how a moral rule can hide a death program back of it. And because it sounds morally good, and it sounds so fair, we assume that it's coming from a good place, and it has a fair type of aim. No, if I own everything, it would be in my interest to say, we are one, we're Americans. Why? Because you see, it keeps you unconscious, and it keeps you asking that question, how do you own everything? And how is it that your children are living well, and mine are in squalor, poverty, and so forth? Why is it that you got to take all the money home with you every time you leave in the evening? And mine are jobless and unemployed and dropping out of school. I cannot supply them with recreational facilities and so forth. You see? Then you have to be what? Race conscious. You see? But we don't want that. They don't want that, you see. We want you to say, oh, we are all one. We are all equal in terms of culture. You know, and you're great people, but I'm still got control of your economic system. No way. We're going to insist on being race conscious as a people. So don't let high-sounding moral statements deceive you. You must interpret statements within context. Because the same statement, no matter how great it sounds, has a different effect and a different outcome depending on the context in which it operates. And so you have to ask, now how is that statement working for you? You know, not just listen to it and say, don't that sound nice? You got to go deeper than that. Why is he making this statement? And in what way does that statement work for him? And how may it work against me, even though it sounds very moral? You have some of these people, I don't see color. Madness. The human eye is designed to see color. But you see, people want us to make ourselves abstractions so that they may the better rob us. That's the point. Now I tell people then, if you don't see color, you don't see your own colored children. And that's what happened. Because we're so busy not seeing color, because we think that's a morally correct attitude, we often do not see the conditions of our own children. And it means the wealth that we create for others and the wealth that we earn because we don't see color, we give it to people of no color. We give it to children who already have more money than they know what to do with. We enrich the rich and impoverish the poor. Yes. That means we're indiscriminate in the way we spend our money. Which means then, in a backhanded sort of way, we subsidize the criminality of our children in the name of moral principle. Our children need more than whites. Consequently, we should do what? Give them more than we give whites. That's justice, isn't it? You see? But you think that you're moral when you don't see your own situation. And the other people like to throw that on you because it makes you blind to what you're doing. I said in a way, we robbed our children so much until the only way they can get money from us is knock us in the head in the street and take it out of our pocket. That's what's happening. You don't spend it in a way that employs them, that develops them economically, because you're so busy not seeing color, and you end up seeing stars. Yes? So we must recognize that education under European domination is an education in servitude. Education in alienation is an education in self-defeat. What did I say? People do not engage in racism or imperialism to do the subordinate group a favor. Understand? And we have to keep that in mind. When people engage in racism, the race that they dominate must be made to work against its interests. That's the nature, that's the basic rock of racism. So when you're educated in a racist system, in an imperialistic system, ultimately you must recognize that that education, as designed by the racists, financed by the racists and so forth, must be an education ultimately that educates us for self-defeat and self-destruction. A self-perpetuation of our subordinate position. And in a sense, the more educated we become, the more we participate in maintaining our subordination. It's an education in dependency, consumerism. Look at again how we talk to our children about why they should get educated. You can buy the things you want. You can have a nice home. Don't you want a nice house? Don't you want a nice car? Don't you want to wear good clothes? There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But then there's something else behind it. There's the idea that you're being educated to do what? Consume. See? Not produce. You see? But to consume. And to measure your status and to measure your esteem in terms of how much you can consume, and what we call conspicuous consumption. And to consume not from your own self-made economic system, but from the system of another people. And to call yourself equal when you can consume equal to another people, but not produce equal to another people. Yeah. You think you're equal because you live with white folks. Because you drive the same cars that white folks drive. No. Who's making the cars? Who sells you the house? You're not equal until you're making those cars and you're selling those houses and building those houses. We get deceived all the time by black leadership comparing income. Yeah. Black folks is 85% of white income. 67, you know, what does that really mean? There's a difference between income and what? Wealth. Yeah, we don't get a wealth comparison. How much of this country do we really what? Own? How much of the means of production do we really own? How much of AT&T do we really own? How much of IBM do we really own? How much of the electric company that feeds Dallas do you own as white people? Why are you only concerned with working for them? Why aren't you concerned with owning the doggone thing? So you compare your salary with your white co-worker, and you think you made it because they're equal, or you make a little more. His daddy owns the doggone thing, man. You see? So you got to compare what? Wealth. A man may own $10 million worth of property and have an income of $100,000. A person may work on a job and have an income of $100,000. They have equal income, but they don't have what? equal power. That man can sell his land, he's got $10 million. This other joker loses his job, he's as broke as the man on the block. You understand? So our income comparisons are not where it's at. We must compare real wealth and ownership and control. Understand? But you see, people will feed you false equalities, equal cultures, equal value, all of that, to really keep you from seeing the real foundational inequalities as such. That's why you have to go beyond multiculturalism as a cultural approach. Consumerism, we have to move beyond consumerism. One of the reasons why we want to educate black males, we want to educate them back into the original African definition of what it means to be a man. The concept of man is a social definition. There is not a simultaneous or not a synonymous relationship between being a man and being a male. Now, they're two different things. We don't have time to explain the whole deal here. Understand? But males must be trained to be men. To be a man is a conferred honor. It's not something that just comes with mere biology. You understand? That's why men have to be trained. See? And we got to understand that. As one of the board members was saying here, the destruction of black men is the destruction of the black nation and the destruction of black people. And if you want to destroy a nation, you destroy the men first. Because it is the men who are the most likely, given the way the world is designed at this point, to resist in a warlike way and overthrow their oppressors. That's why any oppressor and conqueror locks up males of the conquered group, destroys them, emasculates them, puts them in concentration camps and so forth, because he knows what they represent and what possibility they represent and what it means to operate against the group. And therefore men must be trained. And one of the original definitions of the African man is that you are not, the title of man is not conferred on you until you have proved that you can produce for your people. That's why the killing of the lion or the rustling of the cattle from your enemy, it becomes an important symbol. It means now that you arrive at the point where you develop the courage, the efficiency, the mastery over self and so forth, to go out and win a living and to produce, to nurture your people. And until you have developed that capacity to be productive, then the title of man is not conferred on you. Now, what do we have in today's culture, which is one of the bases of black on black violence, black male and black male violence, is black men who define themselves in terms of consumption, not in terms of what? Production. Who do not see themselves as a nurturing aspect of their people, you see, but as people who suck the blood of their people. If you do not appropriately train men, what did I say? Men is a social definition. The society determines what it means to be a man, and it trains males to assume that role. If you do not know what it means to be a man, if the African community cannot define what it means to be a man, which means that they have not socially established what it means to be a man, then your so-called men will be anti-social and work against the social interests of the group. This is what Afrocentrism is about in African-centered education. Is about moving black men away from determining their manhood in terms of the kind of cars they drive and not in terms of the cars they can make. Yeah. The gold they wear, not in terms of the creation of the things that they wear, the clothes that they wear, but not in terms of the manufacture of the clothes they wear. We cannot permit a man to be called a man who can only consume in those areas, because it's the same man that's going to sell drugs to your children, that's going to kill and destroy you on the street in order to do what? Carry the money to a white man. Yeah, this is what education is about. We got to move on here. Yes. Education under the Eurocentric system then is a commodification of white people, turning them into commodities. Are you of some commercial use? Then we can use you. If not, get out of the way. We are being educated to solve other people's problems, to make ourselves useful to whom? Other folks. And we call that intelligence. We take the other people's definition of intelligence. We take a number and we call it, if you got an IQ of this number, you're intelligent. Come on, put that out there. You're only intelligent to the degree that you can use your mind to solve your problem. Understand? I don't care how good you are with IBM and what contribution you made to these other people. That's really not intelligent, you know. Not in the truest sense of the word. We get a man back there, and God bless him, educated in physics, and is going out in space to do what? To put a European, military system in space, so that military system can be used to intimidate African people, so that these weapons, the powerful beam weapons, and the laser weapons, and other exotic weapons, using a black man's mind, can be used to destroy the African people and the African continent with impunity. And there's not a single African nation that is ready to go to war in space and can defend the interests of African people. Tomorrow, if Gorbachev and Bush decided that they no longer needed African people and that they would now wish to wipe the face of the earth clean of African people, there's not an African nation yet that's in the military or technological position to defend African people against it. That's what African-centric education must be about. We must employ our physicists and our scientists to work for us and in our defense and in our interest. Or otherwise their intelligence is a type of ignorance and stupidity. Understand? But Eurocentric education is designed to call those of us who work in their interest and solve their problem what? Very intelligent. An education in conformity. In an education which is Eurocentric, it ignores the destiny and problems of African people. It's an education that is rote and narrow, poor and underfunded, unrelated to the developmental psychology of African children. And it is fundamentally immoral. It is designed to maintain an immoral system and an immoral set of social relations and social arrangements. It is an education that's built on maintaining African people in a particular sort of role. If you read the Atlantic magazine some time ago, there was a piece here by someone named Thomas and Mary Epsom. They state race is no longer a straightforward, morally unambiguous force in American politics. Tell me something now. Instead, considerations of race are now deeply embedded in the strategy and tactics of politics. In competing concepts of the function and responsibility of government, and in each voter's conceptual structure of moral and partisan identity. Race helps define liberal and conservative ideologies, obviously. Yeah, but what do you mean liberal and conservative? Defined around what it means to be what? Black. The fulcrum of that use is built around presidential coalitions of the Democratic and Republican parties, provides a harsh new dimension to concern our taxes and crimes, drives a wedge through alliances of the working classes and the poor, and gives both momentum and vitality to the drive to establish a national majority inclined by income and demography to support policies benefiting the affluent and the upper middle class. In terms of policy, race has played a critical role in the creation of a political system that has tolerated, if not supported, the growth of the disparity between the rich and the poor. In other words, the degradation of black people and the maintenance of black people in positions of subordination is the foundation upon which this system is built, politically, socially, and economically. And you think somebody's going to hand it to you in the name of multiculturalism. You got another thought coming. Race-coded images and language changed the course of the 1980, 1984, and 1988 presidential elections, and the 1990 elections for the governorships of California and Alabama, and the U.S. Senate in North Carolina, and the post of Texas Secretary of Agriculture. Black and race is at the center of this nation. Some of you read the Times piece here, the one that came out in July 8, 1991. Who are we? Yes, who are you? Who's America, they state. A growing emphasis on the nation's multicultural heritage exalts racial and ethnic pride at the expense of social cohesion. What is this saying? Look at it backwards. Right? What is it? A growing emphasis on the nation's multicultural heritage exalts racial and ethnic pride. Is that a problem here? At the expense of what? Social cohesion. What are we saying? If we're to maintain what? Social cohesion, yet we must what? Reduce social and what? Racial and ethnic what? Pride. This is built on the degradation of African people, ladies and gentlemen. We have to keep that in mind. What is Eurocentric education? What is an African-centered education? Eurocentric education is one centered around the past, present, and future of Europe and European people wherever they reside, which considers European people's cultures and concerns to be of preeminent and of virtually exclusive importance, and that of other peoples, their history, cultures, and concerns to be of little or no or of only secondary importance. It is education's primary concern is the maintenance of European socio-economic, political, cultural domination of the world. The European does not plan to give up their position in the world. They cannot afford to. And we have to keep that in mind. And therefore, the Eurocentric education is designed to maintain that and maintain their domination of African people. It mainly functions to maintain European economic domination, military domination, technological supremacy, cultural prestige, control of information, its collection, processing, interpretation, definition, and distribution, and control of the consciousness of other people. That's what Eurocentric education is about. Maintaining domination. That's why when they look over at Japan and they see Japan greater than what? Technologically and other ways, what's the first thing they do? Look at the nature of the education of whom? Their children. Because they recognize that it is the quality of education of their children which will save them from being overrun economically by the Japanese. Which means then that they don't want an equal economy with the Japanese, they want to maintain their position of what? Dominance. They want to maintain their economic power. And therefore, when they see Japan and other nations moving to catch up with them, they go into an intense examination of the nature of the education of their children. We as black people must understand that the major function of educational institutions, as I said earlier, maintain the biological integrity and power of a people and to advance their interests. We see colleges and universities as job factories. Recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that the major function of the major American university is to maintain the military, political, and technological dominance of the United States. When we talk about these weapons that rained on Hussein, when we talk about the arming of space, when we talk about then the nature of U.S. military and technological power, we are talking about things that came out of the university and educational structures. We are talking about weapon systems that were researched and developed by university professors. We're talking about university laboratories and so forth that literally are working for the government and working to maintain the dominance of the United States in the world. The training of white people for jobs is secondary to this particular goal. You have to keep that in mind. You talked about AIDS as germ warfare. You must keep in mind then how germ warfare is perpetrated. Germs are not developed by the man in the street. They're not developed by the poor white racists. They're developed by law-abiding, church-going white scientists. They're developed in universities and institutes. They're developed by MDs. They're developed by people who are in agriculture. Do you understand? Their role is not only the role of healing. If you know about the destructive nature of diseases, you also know how to release those diseases upon the population. You see? And therefore, their universities and their educational system is a part of their military system and is a part of their system of domination. The Harvard Business School is there to train them how to maintain economic dominance. Where is your university that will train you how to take economic power from the other people in this world? Where are your universities that are now doing the research on AIDS so that the black population and the African population can be defended against that disease and other diseases that the Europeans may unleash upon us as a people? You must understand then, it's not enough to prepare your children to go to colleges and universities or to prepare them to be part of European institutions. That in no way secures your life. You must develop an economic system so that you can fund universities and research institutions and other things so that those institutions can work to protect your interests as a people. You must own your own universities and own your own research institutions. The war of the future will be germ warfare that will kill people in their beds. It means then that a technological group of people advanced in medical research, can unleash a germ on a technologically backward people. That technologically advanced people can inoculate themselves against that germ and sit by and watch the other people die and perish. The technologically backward people, if they don't have an economic infrastructure, if they don't have appropriate highways, if they don't have clinics and hospitals across their nations, even if they found the cure, often wouldn't be able to distribute it and move it about in their population, and they would die in the face of it. You understand? And Afrocentric education is deep about survival and protection of people, not just getting people ready to we cannot depend on the goodwill of white folk. The Eurocentric education is therefore education based on the psychohistory of Europeans and is designed to solve the problems faced by Europeans, to satisfy and train non-Europeans to support European ambitions. The New World Order is already here. Yeah, it already is. Not coming, it's here. The day that Russia collapsed, and started coming over to the side of the United States, the world ought to change right at that point. Yeah. The day that we see the United States as the only, real superpower left in the world order has already changed. What are we talking about? What is going to be the new world order? It's already there. We have to understand what that's about. And so now we get Colin Powell coming before the Senate committees, talking, well, we solved the East-West conflict. We've defeated the Russians, economic and so forth. Our only problem now is to deal with uncertainty. They're uncertain about what the color vote are going to do. And therefore, we must reorganize our political and military system to control these uncertainties. So now the discussion is about what? North-South relationships. Relationships between Europeans and non-Europeans. No longer are the war colleges really getting that much into preparing the Americans to fight wars with Russia, to fight wars in Europe, but now to fight wars in Central South America and Africa and other places. And now to recruit African men and women to do what? Fight those wars. Be the best you can be and go and kill other African people. It's amazing that we see the Army as our greatest employer and as having the greatest non-racial equal program, equal employment. But that's the nature of racism. We'll employ you equally when you're employed and bringing death to your own people. As a matter of fact, we'll let you have the majority in the Army by that. And African-centered education is one centered around the past, present, and future of African peoples across the diaspora, which considers African peoples' cultures and concerns to be of equal importance and value to those of any other people, not secondary, not subservient. It is education whose primary concern is the complete liberation of African people from European domination and the domination of any other people. As I'm going to state in a minute, education is designed to solve problems. That is why ultimately black children cannot have the same education as white children because they don't have what? The same problems. Whites do not have to fight black domination of white folk, but blacks have to remove white domination of black folk. And what does that mean? That black children and African children must be educated to carry out that task. That's why it has to move beyond multiculturalism. It is a preparation for war, for overthrow, for the taking of power. We no longer intend to be any people's servants, be they black or any other color or non-color. And it's African children who must struggle with the problem of being dominated. And therefore they must be educated to remove that domination. Consequently, they cannot have the same education as white children because they must solve different problems. You have to understand it, I'm going to come back to that. Because we don't start when we talk about the education of our people with the problems we have to solve. Because when we look at the problems we have to solve, we see why the education of African people is fundamentally different from the education of non-African people. It involves inculcation of an operational African identity and consciousness in African peoples so that they may establish the required social relations. We got to change the whole way we relate to one another as a people. Education is more than an accumulation of knowledge. It is more than an accumulation of skills. It is a transformation of the personality and transformation of the way we relate one to the other. What did I tell you before around last year? That an economic system is not based on money. An economic system is based on the nature of the way people relate to each other. And ultimately, an economic system is a system of social relations. The reason why our money flows out of our pockets and supports other people the way it does is because what? Of the way we have chosen to do what? Relate one to the other. If we change our relationships, then the flow of money would change. You see? So consequently, the Afrocentric education is not just about how you can earn more money. You see? But what would be the nature of social relations such that that money can operate in the interest of African people and of African children as a whole? So we're concerned here then, an Afrocentric education has a primary concern then with the establishment of the required social relations, social organization, social institution, values and goals, which together function to secure and protect. Because it is not enough just to secure liberation, but you must do what? Defend it and protect it. Understand? So it's to secure and protect the survival of African peoples and enhance their quality of life and that of other people. Don't make the mistake of diametrically opposing African-centered education and Eurocentric education. Because Afrocentric education is not a racist education. Understand? And I'll get back to this in a minute. We do not intend to develop as African people so that we can do what? Rob other people. And dominate other people and so forth. So, you know, simply because we say Afrocentric, Eurocentric, you got to look closer what we're talking about here. African-centered education recognizes that if African people are to win and protect their freedom and gain and maintain peace and prosperity, African children and adults must be educated to clearly perceive reality and operate in accordance with it. That's the first thing you got to know. What is real, what is unreal? Eurocentric education is distorted our perception of reality. When one has a distorted perception of reality, one is in this state of psychological and emotional imbalance. And I've often said to us before, in order for us to be in the condition we're in order for 10% of the world's population to rule over the other 90%, in order for African people to starve and die over the world's wealth, we have to be out of our minds. And I mean that literally. We have to be in some way out of contact with reality and not operating according to it. One of the functions of Eurocentric education, one of the reasons why it rewrote history, one of the reasons why it tries to define what is and is not reality, one of the reasons why Europeans want to tell us what is true and what is not true, is so that they can manipulate our vision and our perception so that we cannot distinguish what is real and not real, and therefore keeps us separated from reality so that we can be blind to it and stumble over it and be maintained in a maladjusted state and behave maladaptively. So an Afrocentric education clears our vision and restores our perception of reality. It educates the black and African child and African adult into self-knowledge. Without self-knowledge, you don't know why you behave the way you do. We always, why do we behave like that? That indicates a lack of self-knowledge. But when you let other people write your history, write your psychology, and write about your culture, define who you are, attach various associations to your ethnic identity and so forth, you cannot know who you are, and you cannot know why you behave the way you do. And therefore, behavior is out of your own control because it has an impulsive, driven nature about it. And therefore, we lose self-control because we do not have self-knowledge. African education educates us into self-knowledge, not merely to increase our self-esteem so that we can gain control of ourselves and act in terms of ourselves. And Afrocentric education must teach us to love ourselves. And I'll be back there in a minute, to gain voluntary control over ourselves. You cannot be both self-controlling and under the control of another people simultaneously. The very essence of domination, the very essence of imperialism, the very essence of racism is that one race controls another. Therefore, white people must lose self-control and must not have self-control if they are to come under the control of Europeans. Which is one of the reasons why one of the major problems you will have with black children is a loss of self-control. We must lose control over them. As a matter of fact, we must be so dumbfounded, we try to push them under the control of another people. We must lack confidence in our capacity to educate them ourselves. Therefore, an Afrocentric education means that we must control ourselves. To be in a racist system means that it's other people who call the shots, and the subordinate group reacts. And to a good extent, a lot of our behavior is what kind of behavior? Reactionary behavior. Which means that it is behavior that is not initiated by us, not driven by our own interests, but is a reaction to what other people are doing. To a certain extent that we are almost passive when other people are not doing anything to us. We only seem to operate when we are what? Angry. And our feelings have been hurt. And we're insulted. Then we have mass meetings and marches and protests and so forth. But we're not insulted. It's hard to get us into a what? A proactive mode. But an African-centered education makes you proactive. It makes you initiate your own actions. So we must know then that Afrocentric education teaches us to cooperate one with the other, to love one another. And Afrocentric education helps us to develop affectionate relationships one to the other. Don't you know, ladies and gentlemen, this system can only operate to the degree that black people have problems loving one another? Only to the degree that we have problems being affectionately related to one another? We're going to be back to that in a minute. Love is a taught feeling. All the Europeans say you fall into it, you know. That is something that just happens to you. That is irrational. Of course you want it to be irrational for people you want to control. Yeah. People are taught to love. They're taught how to love. Where are your institutions? Where are our institutions that teach us what? How to love one another. How to relate affectionately one to the other. We have a situation here where we expect our people to behave the way we think they should without providing institutions that do what? Train us to behave the way we should. No child is born with the social, emotional, and other skills that are necessary to function in a culture. Those things must be what? Taught. They don't come by coincidence and accident. And therefore, African-centered education teaches about love and affection and cooperation and reliability and so forth. And African-centered education then teaches us to produce for our own material and non-material needs and self-created desires, to cooperate with each other. And Afrocentric education is therefore education based on the psycho-history of African people. Not the history of other people, what I told you before. The psychology of the people is directly connected to their what? History and experience. Your individual psychology is a product of your unique individual history and experience. Therefore, to explain yourself, we must know what? Your history and your experience. We cannot take the history and experience and the psychology which flows from that history and experience from another person and appropriately explain who you are. The same thing is true about races and ethnic groups. The European experience in the world, the European history in the world, and the psychology that flows from those experiences and from that history is not African history and experience. So consequently, we cannot use European psychology as a basis for the education of black children. The education of black children must be based on the history and experience of black people and the psychology that flows from that history. That is why we must understand our own developmental psychology first. That is why we must study the developmental psychology of the African child. Not developmental psychology, but developmental psychology of what? The African child. Not some average, nondescript, statistical child, but one based on us and what we are about. So therefore, no matter how good your intentions, no matter how much you love the children, with the absence of knowledge of their development and their psychology, you will destroy them even in the name of love and good intentions. And therefore, Eurocentric education is based on the history of Europeans and not on the history of black people. The schools, that is why they need a complete radical change. The schools, the pedagogical approaches, the very social relations and so forth that we have been inherited from another people that were designed for the education of white children and white people in terms of their history and in terms of their destiny. Therefore, there is a solid mismatch between the schools that they're designed and the children who now inhabit those schools. That's a design for failure. Yes. So we want to call what? The children deficient and learning disabled. Instead of looking at the school as really deficient and disabled. So an African-based education is an education based on the psychohistory of Africans and is designed to prepare Africans to solve problems faced by African people, not the problems of America. We will solve the problems of America only to the extent that they fit the solution of our own problems as a people. It prepares Africans then to satisfy African needs and to prepare African people to contribute something to the human race as a whole. The educational destiny of African children have indicated to you before by the very nature of the political and social and economic system that the very orientation of the education of the black child must be what? Conservative. Why must that education be conservative? When you already have what? Advantages. When you already have what? Wealth, power, prestige. The major focus of the education is to what? Maintain advantages, which is to what? Conserve, and to what? Advance and increase those advantages. So it's conservative by nature. Now let's look at African people. What great power advantages do we have over other people? What great wealth advantages do we have over other people? What great military and technological advantages do we have over other people? Huh? What are we conserving then? Everywhere we go in the world, we see the African man under the foot of other ethnic groups, even in our own African countries. We complain day in and day out about the degradation of psychological, sociological, physiological, economical, subordinated position of African people. We talk about Africa as a neo-colonial system, the wealth of Africa being robbed by another people. We see a small European population overrunning the South African situation there. And you're going to tell me you want the same education for your children that white people are giving them. What are you talking about? We are talking about black males being placed in jails, being criminalized in this system, being unemployed. We're talking about drug problems and other kinds of problems. And yet you want to educate your children not to deal with any of these problems and to solve any of those problems. In other words, when we look at the position that black people are in the world today, even if we say we want to be equal to white folk, we are still talking about what? Revolution. Do you know the amount of social, economic, and cultural reorganization that this society has to undergo to have 40 million black folk equal to white folk? Do you know how much transfer of wealth, political power, and other things must happen between these two people for there to even be what we call what? Equality? You know, we don't think about it. We just want to be equal. We want to have the same thing. Oh, yeah? Well, even that requires what? A radical what? Reorganization of the American political economic system. And these people are not going to do what? Give it to us. And therefore, if we're talking about moving African people from our position of subordination, from having our wealth stolen, from having the product of our labor and our culture being stolen by other people, as I talked about earlier, then we must prepare black children for revolution. The destiny of black children is a revolutionary destiny, and they must be uneducated to undertake that task. That's what an Afrocentric education is about, ladies and gentlemen. One of the problems which African Americans and African people must solve. What did I say earlier? African people must gain liberation from European domination. That not only means a gaining of liberation from European domination, because as I said before, you don't just gain liberation from Europeans, you have to make sure that other people don't bring you under their control as well. And I've often asked the question, are we to get out from under the yoke of European domination only to fall under the domination of the Asians? Yeah, the Asians are not going to be any more kind to us than any other people. You see, some of us celebrate Japan's triumph over white folk. But white people out there have no more respect and love for black folk than white folk. We are facing what the white call what? The Pacific Century. Is America in decline this thing here? And now they're talking about what? A century during which who will rule? Asians. Another century of African domination by another people. We must recognize that we operate in a world where we're going to have to defend ourselves against all people. Our rivals are not only whites, our rivals are also Asians, our rivals are also Latin American. Yes, one of the greatest struggles that's going to go on in this country is going to be between Latinos and African Americans. Get used to it. Be real. You're in it right here in Texas, but you don't want to face the reality. Can America compete? Human capital. We've heard now. White man is not going to be the major person employed. Are these minorities in a position to really continue to take care of America? Don't have time to talk to you about it, but in here they're saying, what? Well, we don't have to worry about these black folks. Just import. Just import labor, that's all. That's all we have to do. That's a problem white folks have got solved. You understand? Quickly, Wall Street Journal, the jobless rate in Ireland is nearly 20%. The economy is in a kind of permanent recession, but a growing number of U.S. companies are hiring. In this quaint village of 3,000, single corporation recently took over an unused factory on the edge of town. We're talking about Ireland now. The Connecticut-based insurer has hired 120 young Irish workers to process medical claims flown in daily from the U.S. pay average is about $11,000 a year. What are they saying? It's cheaper to fly the claims over to Ireland, have them processed by Irish people, and bring them back than it is to have them processed in the United States. What are you training your children to do? When the people that own the economy are not hiring in the country at all. We are in an international economic struggle. You understand? The workforce of America is moving to the point where it may not even be where? In America. Afrocentric, you see, all this, a lot of the losing about, equal cultures. No. We got to deal with realities here. Across the town, the office of McGraw-Hill is still talking about Ireland here. Data Services Ireland is running full tilt with the staff of 40 women. A dozen part-timers were recently added to an evening shift, working at computer terminals. Is it enough that you have computers in the schools where your children are? Where is the computer input and stuff like that going to take place? In America? I tell people, why when they start letting black people get into a field at large numbers? It's getting ready to go out. The women maintain the worldwide circulation files of 16 McGraw-Hill magazines by a direct link to McGraw-Hill's mainframes in Hightstown, New Jersey. So McGraw-Hill is not hiring where? In Hightstown, New Jersey. It is hiring where? In Ireland. Those people by computer link are feeding directly into the mainframe and talking to the people in New Jersey as if they're next door. So it's not enough just to train our children in computer skills. For what? To fit into what kind of economic formation? You understand? Those are the kind of questions an Afrocentric education must ask. It looks at the nature of the world, and it looks at the future of the world, and it educates those children in terms of that nature, in terms of those futures, not merely in terms of some sweet brotherly love and harmony between the races. Ladies and gentlemen, racial disharmony is going to be with us for a long time. Get used to it. Oh, I wish I could tell you more about it. We just don't have this time here. But it's talking about here. One phrase they make here. Another factor pulling American companies here is the ability to spread the workforce over different time zones. An Irish office will tend to put demands on expensive mainframe computers at off-peak hours and so forth. And so they get a whole spread. But one of the major things they were saying here was that in a sense, America will employ the world. In other words, we'll look for employees where? Everywhere in the world. These are problems that Afrocentric education must face. And these are the problems that African children must be educated to deal with. It's not enough just to prepare them with skills when the computers are somewhere in Ireland. And I'm going to read to you in a minute, if you read Time magazine, again, August 12, 1991, they talk about racism in Europe for you Negroes. I went to Europe and I forgot I was black. I used to tell people that that's only because you're a visitor and they're going to take your money for 2 weeks. They know they don't have to live with you. But as soon as you start staying in here and you reach a certain level of population, you're going to see something that's going to surprise you. As Europe's ethnic mix begins to change, some countries discover they are not as tolerant of foreign cultures as they once thought they were. And they go here and name different European countries. Germany, alienated German youth lashed out in a fit of xenophobia. Often their targets were workers imported by the communist regime from other Marxist countries. That's that non-class ideology. Like Angola and Vietnam. And sometimes they were simply anyone of another race. In Dresden last April, neo-Nazis threw a Mozambican to his death from a moving streetcar. In May, they invaded a tenement in Wittenberg, forcing 2 Namibians off a 4th-floor balcony Weeks ago, 50 skinheads stormed the Center for Asylum Seekers from the Third World, smashing windows and pummeling residents. No one but the dark-skinned police officers say can feel safe in the streets of Eastern Berlin. And it goes on into France, and it goes on into Britain, and it goes on into Italy. Racism is a real fact in the world. And when people are facing economic structures and issues, then racism will raise its ugly head. New York Times, September 15, 1991. Strangers at the gate. You see that they're hauling this woman out of here. Immigrants are pouring into Western Europe, testing its tolerance and shaking its liberal foundations. Liberalism is only a temporary ideology. You cannot lean on that as a basis for your future. Quickly, census, big red news. Those in New York know about that one. August 31st, 1991. Census, Asian businesses increasing 6 times national rate. New census data show explosive growth in the number of U.S. businesses owned by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. These figures show that Asian American businesses make up the fastest growing sector in the nation. 40 million African American people and the Asian population showing the fastest rate of growth. Their numbers and receipts are growing fast. They are creating more jobs and contributing to the economic well-being of their communities and the country. So we're going to keep them around, you see, because they're creating and adding something to the country. But about those other useless mouths, as Hitler used to call them. This growth is gratifying evidence of the increasingly important role of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders play in the nation's economy, she says. This is the one speaking for the census here. We expect this expansion to continue as businesses owned by these groups mature and branch more strongly into manufacturing, finance, and construction. Where are they going to get that business from? And whose money are they going to get, ladies and gentlemen? Numbers of businesses owned by Asian Americans increased by 989.3% between 1982 and 1987, almost 1,000% in growth within 5 years. A rate more than 6 times greater than the growth rate of all American businesses between 1982 and 87, 14%. That growth rate compares to 80.5% for Latino, 57% for women, and 38% for African American owned business. Bringing up the rear, the largest minority in this country, bringing up the rear in economic growth and development. And it goes on. This is a problem that our children must be educated to solve. And they must be educated specifically to solve those problems. They cannot receive a general degree in business administration or a general degree in a master's in business administration. They must receive a degree that speaks to the issue and makes them write theses and dissertations on how do you transform the economic disorganization of the black community. How do you use this wealth to develop greater wealth and greater power among yourself? That's what you got to do. You can't do that way in a school that trains you to work for IBM and those others. Recently here, we talked about a community in New York City of 140,000 Asians. A bank opened a new branch. In its first 2 weeks, the China Trust Bank took in $6 million from 400 depositors, said the manager. It's fantastic, Mr. Lynn said, the new business, and the state official described it as pretty darn good. And, it goes on over here. 140,000 Chinese and Korean immigrants now live in Flushing. How many black people live in this place? What kind of banks do you have? And this, I didn't read to the beginning, they have something like, 30-some banks in the neighborhood. Okay? But it's interesting when you get over here and talk about all this money that's developing. In one bank, they got $3.24 billion deposit, and another $3.13 billion, and one right at the other. Why? Because these people are Sino-centric. You understand? They have a what? Chinese what? Identity. They have a set of social relationships, one with the other. And this is what permits this kind of deal. They go and say, it has a capital base 10 times that of the local Chinese American banks. It's talking about another bank here, Chinese bank, and therefore can compete directly with American giants. Did you know what I'm saying? These are banks that are not what? Insular banks. They are getting set to do what? Compete with American banks based on a what? Chinese foundation. An Afrocentric education prepares our children to compete with the greatest economic forces in the world based on an African foundation. That's what it's about. But you don't get that with the regular MBA degree, ladies and gentlemen. No, sir. And listen to what he says. And no problem. Chinese people have a lot of savings, he said. They will come to us because we are Chinese. Okay? Now you see, he's going to make all kinds of excuses. Now they come to us not because we black, but because we good, you know. Now they come to us because we are Chinese. We said all people. That's why you don't get it. You know? And he said, well, they come to us because what? They are Chinese. Chinese people are traditionally shy and won't talk to strangers. Again, what? Social relations. China Bank has hopes to lure non-Asian customers. Now they're going to get the Negroes. Mr. Lynn says, with automatic teller machines and high rates of certificates of deposits, we are here to compete against Citibank, the second largest corporation in the country, and chase another large bank in the country, not the local Chinese community banks. We are going for the white vote. We are, as a Chinese people, are not setting up to do what? Destroy what? Each other. We are being set up to what? Work the other ones. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is what an education is about. We don't have time to talk about all these things. There's so many things here. Let me just quickly run through it here then. Therefore, our children face special problems of liberation and defense of our liberation, economic parity and prosperity. We must gain economic parity, not equal jobs, but what did I say earlier? Equal ownership, control of resources, not equal opportunity, real control. That means that the African American child must be taught how to gain it. They must come to a deep understanding of the nature of this economic system and how they can use that system against itself to gain control of it and to get into it as a people. That's why the education is very different. It's not just teaching how to multiply interest. This is the nature of the Eurocentric economic system. It is designed this way and that way. We now are preparing you to gain ownership in this system. We want you to wrap yourself so deeply in this system until they can't get you out unless they destroy themselves in the process. You understand? Therefore, you're going to have a real course in how to gain control of European economic conglomerations. You're going to have a real education in what is power, how is power developed and maintained, and how it is protected. So the whole subject matter areas will be different because you got to do what? Solve different problems. This is an African education, not a multicultural education. We have to understand because we're dealing with African problems. We must catch up with these people technologically and advance beyond them. These Europeans are getting ready to move into space. As I told someone the other day, they were talking about European global supremacy. I said, no, you must understand the Europeans are getting ready for galactical supremacy. They want to maintain supremacy in the universe, in the galaxy itself. They have already planted their flag on the moon, which is symbolic that they see the moon as their property. They're going to spread now, just as they spread their colonialism around the globe of the earth. They plan to colonize space itself. Now, we don't own one piece of land in space, and we have not developed the African capability of moving into space. It means Even when Africa is robbed of its material resources, when the oceans are robbed of their material resources, the Europeans will then mine the moons and mine the other planets and have full ownership of those things, and Africans will not have one red cent left at all. You understand what I'm saying? And that means then black children must not be just trained to work for technological systems. We must actually own them. The African American is in a pivotal role in this world. It is through the African American that African people across the world will move forward. It is because we're in the belly of the beast. It is because we're in a position to take over these companies, to own parts of them and large parts of them, we can get into them and transfer the technology to African people across the world. We can literally then build an African ownership of American technology and be directly, which should be our role, and we should prepare our children for that. Because there's no way we're going to start Africa from ground zero to catch up with European and Asian technological powers. But we're in a position that we don't have to do it that way. We can jumpstart African people because we have African people in America. And that's why the African child must be educated to gain more than a foothold in the system, but to buy these companies and control these companies and then build economic networks with Africans across the globe as a way of moving African people into the space age and into the technological age. That's what an African-centered education is about. Otherwise, you'll work for them and they'll buy you, just get rid of you. You see, you got to own them, and you got to ship this information out as fast as you can get it in your hand. You got to consult African people. You got to invest in the African nations and so forth. You got to go up to Congress and open the American markets to African manufacture and make them give African nations favored nation treatment so that African products can come into this market so that they can stimulate the manufacturing and technological development of African nations across the world. That means those children must be politically educated so that this can be accomplished. We are not talking about a multicultural education here. We are talking about an Afrocentric education. It is the only one that ultimately counts. We must build a nation within a nation. Every other ethnic group virtually is a nation within this country. It operates as a nation. Some of you read Henry Ford's book, The International Jew. I guess I'll get help for mentioning that one. But one of the things he says, one of the things that makes Jewish people very powerful is that in a sense they are what? A nation within a nation. Read Cruz's book. He talks about a similar thing, plural but equal. Giving black people a non-economic liberal program while they themselves, of course, maintain the integrity of their economic and political power. People who are less than 3% of the U.S. population determine U.S. policy and so forth. And here we are, 12 to 15%. 5 times their population. And yet we cannot influence American policy toward African countries. Our children must be educated to do that. If we are to build a nation in a nation, they must be educated to think of that as a major goal, and they must be taught governance in terms of African people and government in terms of African people. We have seen the inner cities being segregated. This represents possibilities for us. African people now, majority of the population, perhaps along with Latino people, have 51 American cities. There are great possibilities here. Let's not look at Detroit as a disaster case. Let's not look at Dallas as a possible disaster case and so forth. Let's look at these as major centers spread across the United States that can form the basis of a national economic distribution system that can connect and couple with the international African Caribbean, African Central South America, and African economic system, ladies and gentlemen. We must their enforcers. Understand? We should learn that from Reconstruction. That whites write laws and they erase laws. The whole Thomas affair to me was a farce. With people getting involved with Thomas and Hill and not dealing with the question of what importance is the Supreme Court to us anyway. You know, what does it matter? Is the Supreme Court what lies between black people and disaster? We're in trouble. I told you before, when a white man has to make a decision between feeding his children and yours, no civil rights laws, constitution, or anything else is going to keep him from feeding his. You got to keep that in mind. You must always keep that in mind. You think getting black people in one of these positions represents some security to you? Recognize, ladies and gentlemen, what I call the American dilemma. The more black people are elevated in the system, the farther down the masses are going to be pushed. In fact, they're elevated to obscure the oppression of the masses. Remember this while you talked about Thurgood Marshall. He's a great man. But remember the Supreme Court made some of its most what? Regressive rulings when Thurgood Marshall was on the court. Remember this when you talk about homelessness. That a black man was Secretary of what? Housing. When the crisis came into being. Remember this when you talk about the health, infant mortality, and other kind of stuff that plagues our community. That we have a black man as Secretary of what? Health. And the black lifespan is getting shorter. Huh? Remember this when you talk about Dr. Colin Powell. That when he was elevated to the position, he attacked what? Non-white nations and attacked white nations. You cannot rest your security in the appointment of black people to positions. You cannot rest your security in votes. You cannot rest your security in laws written by white folk and enforced by white folk. You can only rest your security on the real power you have to defend yourself against your enemies. Law or no law. And therefore African people and African children must be trained to assume real power. So then, in the end, an African-centered education is based on an African psychohistory, on the history of our people and the psychology that comes from that, and it's based on the future tasks that black people must solve and must undertake as a people. An African-centered education must deal with the self-alienation that I referred to earlier. It must deal with internalization of racist attitudes that plague our people today. It must deal then with the cognitive distortion that has occurred during our oppression under Europeans. African-centered education is an educational rationale for determining curriculum content, pedagogical methods and approaches, and school organization. We must put back, an African-centered education put back into the black mind and character what the Europeans had to take out to maintain their domination. And there were many of those things, you see. In other words, I want to tell people, if you want to get a good idea of what the character and nature of many of our people are, you just ask yourself the question, what must be missing from our character such that the system can stay in place? You see? Or else you can ask the other way, what must not be in our character? What must not be the character of our minds? What must not be the nature of our social relations? And so forth. If the system is to survive, and then you will see those things what? Missing, or distorted, or impaired, or inhibited than in the black mind and character. Now we get to the back way. And therefore, Afrocentric education performs a psychoanalysis of African people and asks, what characteristics has this system taken out to maintain itself, and which must now be what? Restored in order to change the nature of the racial status quo. In other words, then, black people are robbed of self-love in order that they can love everyone but who? But self. And what did I say earlier? An African-centered education then trains us back into self-love. We cannot, the European system cannot allow for us to love ourselves in the right sort of way, because they couldn't use us the way they do. That has to do with male-female relations too. Maybe one day I thought we'd get that thing. Black people who had to have been robbed of self-determination, what I said earlier, you cannot be under the control of another people to be under the control of your what? Self at the same time. And therefore you must see your salvation, you must see the native forces in your life as existing where? Outside of yourself. You must see then, you must expect what we call an external locus of control. We must then wait for messiahs and wait for some Moses or some other kind of cataclysmic event to rescue us from our situation. Most of all, though, we cannot be permitted an internal locus of control. That would mean that we would be in self-control, and that's incompatible with the system of domination. Consequently, an African-centered education must restore the control of African people back where? To the inside of African people. The self-confidence of African people has been destroyed, not because the Europeans hate us, because it performs a social function, an economic function. Why? The absence of self-confidence in African people means that many of us don't want to take entrepreneurial risk. We don't have the faith and the persistence to go forward. Our absence of self-confidence in terms of our economic power and possibility means that other groups can move into the vacuum created by the lack of self-confidence. So consequently, it's in the interest of European and other economic forces that black people have little confidence in their economic possibilities, because it is that lack of confidence that they use to enrich themselves. So consequently then, an African-centered education teaches consciously self-confidence. It is a conscious, explicit part of an Afrocentric curriculum. Not coincidental,